I had allergies and it just flared up like crazy here with the stuff in the air. I apologize for my voice. But thank you for that introduction, John. You know, we get invited to an awful lot of events in LA. Whether here in the city of Regina or across the province as ministers, as the Minister of Parks and Culture, I get invited to an awful lot of events. And quite often it's just great meetings on behalf of the government of Saskatchewan. And it's often just a bio I take off the website, as John related some of the things on my bio. But I had the most interesting introduction a couple of weeks ago. I'm from Rose Valley, as John pointed out. I was invited back to speak at the high school graduation in Rose Valley a couple of weeks ago by my niece, who was graduating. And there was 14 graduates in the class, 11 women, 3 boys. And it was one of these prototypical high school graduations in small town Saskatchewan. It was in the gymnasium, the place was decorated, all the families were there. And it was a wonderful meeting. 33 years after I graduated from that high school, I was back to be the guest speaker. And my niece introduced me. So she went through the litany of things from the bio, from the website. And at the end she said, "So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Honorable Uncle Kevin." And then she corrected herself and realized that she made a mistake. But you know, but into the invitation to speak at that high school grad got off to an inauspicious beginning some 5 or 6 months ago at Christmas time. I was visiting with my parents, and my niece came up to me and she said, "Uncle Kev, would you be the guest speaker at our high school grad in May?" I said, "Oh." I said, "I don't know what I'm doing in May, but give me the date, I'll check on my schedule. If I'm available, I'd be delighted to do so." I said, "Why me?" Well, she said, "Our principal said to us we should, to the graduating class, you choose your own guest speaker. You should try and have somebody who's graduated from this high school and who has made something of themselves." And I thought, oh. She says, "We talked about it, we can't think of anybody, so we're wondering if you would do it." And I said, "Oh." And that's typically how you have to get used to these kind of things in public life, because you're never quite sure where the slings and arrows are going to come from, and trying to get successful, and from your own family in some cases. But you know, I had the opportunity to listen to an awful lot of speakers at different events I go to. And last year, some of you were there at our convention. We had retired General Rick Hilliard as our guest speaker at the SAS Party convention. Not to be partisan here or talk politics, but it was just happened to be at our convention. And he told the story. He was talking about troop morale over in Afghanistan, and how he was struggling with dealing with troop morale over in Afghanistan when these young men were so far from home. And there were a couple of things that they really, really wanted while they were over there in combat. One was Tim Hortons, which they really missed, and they set up Tim Hortons over in Afghanistan. And the second was the Stanley Cup playoffs, being able to see hockey on a regular basis. More for the men, obviously, than the women, but I don't want to be sexist about that. More women that love the hockey too. So the general, to his amazement, these are his words, not mine, but he called up Commissioner Gary Bettman and said, "I'd like to get the Stanley Cup to Afghanistan, to enhance troop morale." And they went back and forth with Commissioner Bettman, and they were allowed to take the Stanley Cup over. So this is 2007. He took it over to a forward operating base outside of Kabul. He brought the Stanley Cup. And you know, the fellow with the white gloves that travels with the Stanley Cup actually went with them to the Stanley Cup over to Afghanistan. The troops had no idea, and they showed up there with the Stanley Cup. And they opened up the case, and there's the Stanley Cup, and the troops went crazy. And this one young soldier said, "You know, sir, it's kind of ironic." And the general said, "Why is that, soldier?" He said, "Well, we're now in Afghanistan, home of the Taliban. The Taliban are actually closer to the Stanley Cup than the Toronto Maple Leafs in the last 4 years." That was really good. Sorry, John. And I just want to say a couple of words about John. We enjoy a very, very strong relationship with the Regina District Chamber of Commerce, with the board members, and I was on the Chamber board many years ago, and I know how hard you folks work, and the board members and the professional staff at the office. And I don't say this gratuitously because John's sitting right here. I've said it to his face. He comports himself well in representing you as members of the Regina District Chamber of Commerce and dealing with the provincial government. He is an individual that I can attest to with my colleagues that when John speaks, we listen. And we listen because he conducts himself professionally and thorough, objective, and reasonable, and brings forth issues not in a fashion that he's seeking out attention or media attention for his organization, but because they are legitimately issues that are being raised by you as members of the Chamber Commerce, and government ought to know about it. So we thank him for that. We thank him and the board members for this ongoing, I think, strong relationship whereby we don't always agree on everything. We can't, as a provincial government, we have to have the interests of the entire province when we're making decisions, but you are certainly well represented by your CEO and your board members, and I just want to say that very, very publicly. It was just about a year ago, just over a year ago, that I was appointed to cabinet. I remember that week very, very well. You may recall, not because there was a cabinet shuffle, but the Premier indicated to our caucus he was going to shuffle the cabinet after the session, a year ago after the spring session. It happened to coincide with the same week that Prince Charles and Camilla were in town. You might recall them being here. And we had an event for them at the legislature. They attended several other events here in the city and the province. And it's kind of an exciting time as a politician, because it's not every day you get invited to the provincial cabinet. I remember getting a phone call, and I don't think I'm telling details of the school here, but I remember getting a phone call from the cabinet secretary a couple of days ahead of time saying, the Premier would like to see you at such and such a time, on such and such a date, at such and such a place. And I went to meet with the Premier when I was invited, and it was him and some of the senior staff, and he invited me to join the cabinet and indicated which responsibilities he wanted me to take on. He kind of gave me some of the job descriptions, if you will, of what he wanted to see accomplished in that portfolio over the ensuing year or so. And as I was leaving, meeting with the Premier, he said, now, this is on a Thursday afternoon, he was making an official announcement the next morning at Government House for the swearing in and the introduction of the new cabinet. And he said, I would just ask Kevin that you keep it quiet to yourself if you could until tomorrow when the announcement's made at 10 o'clock, and we just don't want any words getting out there, so to speak, until the official announcement of the swearing in. I said, well, Premier, my mom and dad live in Rose Valley. I said, they won't make it in for the swearing in. Do you mind if I give them a call? Just give them a heads up. I said, absolutely. Call your mom and dad. Let them know. So that evening, I called mom and dad back home. Shelley knows my mom and dad. She knows that. And my mother's a soft-spoken, very reserved type of individual. Unlike my father, of course, who is somewhat more, well, I suppose you could say like me, a little more bombastic and a little more out there. My mother got on the phone. I said, Mom, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be invited to join the provincial cabinet tomorrow. Well, that's nice. I'm sure you'll do a good job. That's it. My dad got on the phone. Dad, I just want to let you know that the Premier's appointed me to the cabinet tomorrow. Really? What portfolio? I said, well, Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport. Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport? What the hell does that mean? Is that mean free tickets to all the sporting events in the province? But I said, think of it this way. They live near Greenwater Provincial Park. So I said, think of it this way. And they go there quite often to have dinner on Sundays or what have you. I said, the next time you go to Greenwater Provincial Park, when you pull up to the gate there, the young lady or the young man working at the gate, you can tell them, my son is in charge of this park. And there was the silence, and then the phone goes, well, I'm going to do that. He goes, there's some other things I want to fix at that park too. I'm going to tell you. I said, no. Don't do that. I haven't had a lot of reports from Regina, but I suspect she's probably tried to pull that false authority once or twice up there. But it's an interesting question. Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport. What does the minister do? We're just chatting at the table here. As my colleagues call it, the Minister of Fun. Because if you think about it, nothing to do with me, but since I was appointed cabinet, the Premier pointed this out to me last year when I met with him, as he was talking about what was coming up in the year. Since I've been appointed to cabinet as Minister of Fun, we've had the Canadian Country Music Awards in Saskatoon. We've had Breakout Fest here in Regina last fall. We've had the Juno Awards about 6 weeks ago or so here at both Moose Jaw and Regina. We've had the Memorial Cup in Saskatoon, and it's going to culminate obviously with the Grey Cup in the Queen City later this year, this fall. So I suspect when I'm at the cabinet table, we're debating heady issues of state. And at the end of cabinet meetings, I get to discuss some of the events coming up. There's no doubt the Minister of Health looks down the cabinet table at me and just shakes his head, knowing full well what he has to deal with in the upcoming week and what I get to deal with. And so quite often my colleagues are ribbing me about being the Minister of Fun. In the election of 2011, I think it's important to note that we increased our seats here in Regina on the government side. We had 3 of 11 seats prior to the 2011 election. We now have 8 seats of 11 here, soon to be 12, with electoral boundaries going through. And I think it's important because I hear from time to time from individuals, whether they be in the business community or whether they be constituents of mine, that they think that the city of Saskatoon does better than the city of Regina at the hands government. And I would just respectfully disagree. I mean, if you look at the activity going on in downtown Regina here today, when's the last time we saw this number of construction cranes dotting the skyline in downtown Regina? No thanks to the government. I'm not standing here taking credit for that. That's the business community. That's you driving that investment. That's you putting your dollars at risk. But where government does play a role in this, Councillor Burnett knows this, we've got the continued construction on the West Bypass, Highway number 1. Millions and millions of dollars going into that bypass, hooking up with Pinky Road, eventually going up to Highway 11 so that we can have these large trucks bypass the city of Regina and not have to carry these dangerous goods through sometimes our downtown. We've got plans underway for the new east-southeast bypass. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be involved in that project. John's been intimately involved with it, has met with the government on a few occasions to talk about some of the concerns expressed by the business community on that bypass, where it ought to go and why it ought to go where it's going. And it's done a great job of bringing together some of the business folks and the constituents out on the east side of the city and talking about those issues. But hundreds of millions of dollars are going to go into that east-southeast bypass. We have a new residence announced at the University of Regina. I've been in meetings with the Minister of Advanced Education and senior leadership of the University of Regina, where they talked about their capital priorities. At the top of that list has always been and continues to be housing initiatives for their students. We've got housing issues in the city of Regina, no doubt about that. But they as well have housing issues with respect to their students. We've got a new residence going up at the University of Regina. The Plains Surgical Center has been announced, and we'll move forward for not only the city of Regina, but for patients in southern Saskatchewan, with STARS here now doing a tremendous job in bringing critically ill or injured people to the tertiary care hospitals here in the city of Regina. We are going to build the Plains Surgical Health Center, and in meetings with those involved in the medical community and those involved with the Hospitals Regina Foundation, they have said if we can have an outpatient surgical center, it will take the backlog off of both the Regina General and the Pasco. It will alleviate some of the pressures here in the emergency departments. If we can get some of this work done over at a new surgical center, we don't need a full-scale tertiary hospital. We need to be able to do some outpatient day surgeries. We're moving ahead with that here in the city of Regina. By the way, announced before any involvement with the stadium here in the city of Regina. It was something that the Regina MLAs in meeting with the Premier and the Treasury Board, the Minister of Health said, we need this because we hear it on the doorsteps as the #1 concern being expressed by constituents, healthcare. We have revenue sharing in the city of Regina that has gone up from $33.5 million just 2 years ago in 2011 to over $41 million in this coming year, this fiscal year. That's a 22% increase over the last 2 years. A 161% increase in revenue sharing for the city of Regina since the year 2007 when Premier Wall was elected. That's money going right into the coffers of Councillor Burnett and his colleagues on City Council to help pave roads and put in sewer systems and the other things they need to do for infrastructure here in the city of Regina that didn't exist prior to the election of our government. And of course, we have a new stadium as part of the Regina Revitalization Initiative. And I hear, as I'm sure Councillor Burnett and others here, I met with the mayor yesterday on some issues, we talked about this as well. If you're for the stadium, you tend to focus on the stadium as part of the RRI. If you're opposed to the stadium, you tend to focus on the stadium as part of the RRI. And no one talks about all the other components of the Regina Revitalization Initiative. And it's going to be tremendous for our capital city, ladies and gentlemen. So these are just some of the investments, not to mention the new schools going into the city of Regina, our contributions to the Regina Capel Health Region, housing initiatives, investments in people living with disabilities, and increased incomes for seniors on low income, the most vulnerable citizens of our society outside of underprivileged children. I could go on and on with respect to investments in the city of Regina. I say this simply for the sake of talking about the fact that I think you are being well represented by the 8 MLAs here in the capital city on the government side of the ledger in ensuring that there are tax dollars, millions and millions of dollars going in to this city. Now, my friends, many of you have heard our Premier speak. Arguably, I would argue, the most gifted political communicator in the country of Canada right now. And I, for one, am privileged and honored to serve with you. And I'm glad that he's out there selling the province of Saskatchewan, and we were chatting about it at lunch here about this conference he's over at in England right now. This hidden society, if you will. He's there talking about the province of Saskatchewan. He's there talking about the resources we have in the province of Saskatchewan. He's there looking for new customers, for you, the business community, in the province of Saskatchewan. But he often talks these days not just about the economy and growth. He talks about why this government, his government, should not be pursuing policies of growth just for growth's sake, but rather what that growth will allow us to do. It will allow us to enhance our already enviable quality of life. He spoke to a crowd of 2,000 people last week at his annual fundraiser. Some of you may have been there. Where the central thesis of his address was, what is the answer to this question? We need growth because... ... And he went on to talk about certain individuals and their personal circumstances and how they benefit from a growing economy. He outlined with specificity how these people, whether it be the healthcare system they had to access, the education system, finding gainful employment, or starting a new business, how a growing economy helps those kinds of individuals with respect to their personal circumstances. And he linked it all to quality of life here in the province of Saskatchewan. And as I have said to anyone who will listen when I've given talks around the province since being appointed to this ministry, the entire threshold of my ministry of parks, culture, and sport speaks to quality of life issues. Our provincial parks, as an example, all 34 of them, soon to be 35. We have Great Blue Heron Provincial Park up north of Prince Albert. We passed the legislation in the spring session, hope to proclaim it later this summer and open up that new provincial park, which will be keeping a campaign promise from 2007, adding 2 new provincial parks to this province. We've got this one done, we're going to announce it and proclaim it. We're working on a second one. But our provincial parks, all 34 of them, set record visitations last year with over 3.5 million visits. They are the second biggest tourism draw for people outside the province of Saskatchewan. When people come from outside our borders into Saskatchewan, our provincial parks represent the second biggest draw for tourism. Anybody know what the first draw is? Casinos. People outside the borders of our province, they want to come here and spend their money in our casinos. We'll take it. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, the people of Saskatchewan love to camp, including my boss, who takes full advantage of the camping season. And I can tell you this, believe you me, if he's out camping, Bob knows this from our office, and there's an issue in a provincial park, I hear about it immediately. So I don't need to survey a bunch of our park users, although we do that annually. I've got the chief pollster out there himself, talking to individuals who are utilizing our camps and our provincial parks. Our government spends about $13.5 million a year in capital improvements in our parks. A 300% increase in capital spending in our provincial parks since when we took office. Giving credence to the old adage that if you build it, they will come. That's quality of life, ladies and gentlemen. We had a short summer season here, particularly if you look at this last year. People want to get out of that May long weekend and start enjoying our parks. In the area of sport, we have an agreement with SAS Sport that flows lottery dollars through to that wonderful organization. And they in turn provide dollars to the various sport governing bodies throughout the province. They spend in excess of $21 million a year, as of the latest year end, and over 300,000 residents, obviously many of them are kids, are registered participants in sport activities in the province of Saskatchewan. We as the government have provided capital funds for new facilities in Meadow Lake, Kindersley, Moose Jaw, Weyburn, Estevan, Melville, and of course here in Regina, amongst many other communities. We initiated a community rate affordability grant that can be the difference between a small town's rate being viable or not. It doesn't seem like a lot of money, $2,500, but I've had letters from small communities who say that is the difference in them paying their utility bills to keep the rink open all winter long. And if any of you are from small town Saskatchewan, you know that the community, the skate rink or the curling rink are the hubs of activity over those long winter months. And of course, we have our active families benefits for every citizen in the province. In the area of culture, I know some folks from SAS Culture are here. Ladies and gentlemen, I am blessed to have been and continue to be invited to dozens and dozens of events throughout the province where I get to meet the most interesting people and partake in the most fascinating events. And if the mayor were here, I would talk about him and I dancing at the Filipino Christmas party this past December. Well, not together, but us doing a traditional Filipino dance where he was much better at it than I. And he can obviously cut it out. I get to partake in events like that. to unveiling Scotty the T-Rex down in East End, Saskatchewan. And by the way, you have not been there yet, I strongly urge you to go down to East End, Saskatchewan, to the T-Rex Discovery Center. The largest T-Rex, completely intact, found in the world, discovered by a retired school principal on his first archaeological dig. How's that for hitting the jackpot the first time around? Where they found Scotty intact, and oh, by the way, they now tell me they think Scotty is a female, but they didn't know that at the time. Now analyzing bones, they found some proteins and whatnot in the bones that have survived millions and millions of years, where they believe that Scotty is in fact a large female. But it is a fascinating center where you can take your kids, you can learn about archaeology. You can learn about the fossils that we have here in the province of Saskatchewan, particularly down in the southwest. Or I get to go out to Humboldt and help unveil a new designated heritage site, the old post office that turned into a museum, which is a wonderful testament to that community. And I got to walk the red carpet of the Jews. Where I go back to my youth and just fantasize for that 30 seconds that I am that rock star walking down the red carpet, and it's brought back thundering to earth when 200 screaming young ladies stopped almost in unison and went, who the hell is he? This is by far, the cultural side is by far the most diverse part of my ministry, and one that truly impacts each and every one of us in some form or fashion. A couple of examples where the business community, the private sector, has partnered with government with incredible success in the cultural arena. I talk about pilot programs like Main Street Saskatchewan that provide seed money for the revitalization of 4 downtown main streets in Indian Head, Wolseley, Maple Creek, and Prince Albert, where, ladies and gentlemen, an investment of $172,000 from the provincial government triggered $1.7 million in private sector investment for their main streets, the beautification of their main streets. I attended a lecture from a worldwide expert last year at Heritage Week over at the Artesian, who talked about the importance of revitalizing your downtown, whether you're a city the size of Minneapolis or a community of 5,000. Why? For economic impact reasons. And secondly, when tourists come to your community, the first thing they judge a community by is what? Their main street. It determines whether they want to stay in that community for a while and spend some of their dollars. It even determines whether they want to move to that community if they're thinking of relocating for retirement or starting a new business. $1.7 million from the private sector into beautifying their downtown main streets. Investing $1 million from government over 4 years of Arts Fest. A matching funding program in conjunction with Business for the Arts, where in the first 2 years, our $500,000 from you, the taxpayer, investment, that $500,000 investment became the genesis for 84 cultural organizations to partner with 400 businesses to secure an additional $1.7 million again in private sector investment. So the government doesn't have to do it all, ladies and gentlemen. The private sector, you, the business community, are stepping up in the arts and cultural communities. Or the dollars that are provided to SAS Culture, again, one of our major partners in the log agreement, where this past year almost $15 million was made available to benefit upwards of 1,500 cultural organizations across the province. We have monies available through the Community Initiatives Fund. This last year's budget, the one most recently tabled by the Minister Kravets, a 5% increase for the Saskatchewan Arts Board and their support for a variety of individual artists and cultural organizations. A 5% lift is one of the largest lifts across any area of funding in government. In this budget, it's our commitment to the arts community. Or indeed, monies directed towards our creative industries, with the creation, literally the creation of Creative Saskatchewan, and a new $5 million fund available to support those industries, as well as the $1 million transition fund that assisted these groups, provided in cooperation with the Arts Board. Ladies and gentlemen, our government is supporting our creative and cultural economy in unprecedented ways. Quality of life. For you see, ladies and gentlemen, this is why you go to work every day. This is why you take all that risk and start businesses and employ thousands of people, not only in our city, but across the province, so that you and your employees can earn a living. So that you can take your kids to the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, to the Science Centre, to a rider game, to play sports themselves, to go camping for a couple of weeks. This is why a growing economy and more people living in our province is a good thing. More and more people in our province allows places like the Artful Dodge, or the Artesian, or the Globe Theatre, or the Mackenzie Art Gallery, or Victor Soloway Regina Symphony, with a myriad of other festivals, venues, shows, concerts, and sporting events to come into our city and to exist and to thrive, for you to benefit from them. Quality of life. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to make decisions about investing in areas that speak to quality of life, I want to leave you with a couple of points. I think it's fair for all citizens to ask critical questions of their government. That's fair. I think it's fair for citizens to demand and expect ethical behavior of their government. I think it's fair to have their government be ever vigilant about spending your money. But I also think it's fair that you don't compare us to perfection. Compare us to the marketplace, if you will. You're business people. The marketplace for us is perhaps other governments, and what they're doing in the context of their fiscal situations and the policies that they're providing for their citizens that will enhance quality of life. Or compare us to competitors. In our case, other political parties and what they are offering. I don't think any of you, as business people or business owners, would ever compare your company to perfection. I think you may strive for it. You may want your employees to strive for it, but you typically benchmark yourselves against either the market leader if you're not the market leader. And if you are the market leader, then you benchmark yourselves against what's next and what your competitors are doing. For you see, we will continue to strive to do better. We will make mistakes. We will learn from those mistakes. But I would invite you to do some comparative shopping, if you will, as business people who are always striving to have more and more customers. And if you compare shop and look at the marketplace with respect to governments, Premier Wall's record of 6 consecutive balanced budgets, reducing taxes where and when we can in the context of a balanced budget, investing in areas that the people of this province have identified as their priorities: healthcare, education, social services, highways, infrastructure. Seeing an increasing population, not a decreasing population, an environment that is conducive to starting a business, raising a family, and enjoying an enviable quality of life. Ladies and gentlemen, I will put that record up. Not against perfection, because we always can and should do better. But in a competitive marketplace, to use a business analogy, our government will continue to respond to our customers' needs, you, the citizens, by investing in areas that contribute to our quality of life. Thank you for inviting me here today. Well, we were playing a funding role, and the number escapes me off the top of my head, Bob. Is it $2.5 million? $3.5 million that the government's committed to the NAIG, the North American Indigenous Games. So we just discussed that at Cabinet the other day. I think Minister Ryder has the file on that, and we're providing $3.5 million towards that. Last question. You asked us to do a comparison. Oh, sorry. You asked for the comparisons in terms of different levels of government. Maybe this isn't a fair comparison, but I would venture to say that you stand up very, very, very well against what's going on in the Senate and your views on the Senate. Well, as you may or may not know, the Premier's announced that our party is undertaking a vote right now for our party membership. So again, I want to get partisan or political here with respect to inside the beltway, if you will. That we're currently holding a referendum as to whether we, as a party, should take a position of abolishing the Senate. It is the Premier's stated position on that, so I will support that position.
T-Rex Museum, 3435 Provincial Parks. Through what cultural specific initiatives is the government supporting the creative class, Richard Florida at, I'm not sure what that says, but anyways, the whole Richard Florida thing, to help fire up local economies?
Well, again, I think it's, there's a lot of areas with respect to cultural spending I can get into. More specifically, I addressed a couple of them in my remarks, where the government is playing a role is the Creative Saskatchewan. It is a new $5 million fund that our creative industries, that being film, television, digital media, music, dance, theater, visual artists, publishers group, can access this type of funding. I just met with the Saskatchewan Publishers Group this week, and they accessed approximately $200,000 from the $1 million transition fund that we did with in cooperation with the Arts Board. $200,000 they never had access to before. before to go into markets they've never been to before. They were ecstatic about that. They met with me and they said, look, we've gone to trade shows, if you will, as publishers, publishing authors, not just from Saskatchewan, but from across the country, but these publishing organizations, companies, some of them are nonprofit, are based here in Saskatchewan. And they got to go and sell books, and they were able to go to markets they've never been to before and sell their books because they had access to this new $200,000. That's contributing to the creative economy. As I said earlier, and I maintain this position, the government doesn't have to do it all. We do have a role to play. We have a role to play through Creative Saskatchewan. We have a role to play through our lottery agreement with SAS Culture and the different organizations they support. But the private sector has a role to play as well. Because if you enjoy the quality of life you receive from attending some of these venues, whether it's an art gallery or you're teaching, if you're putting on a little performance there, or an entertainer performing with the Artful Dodger, to use some Regina examples, then A, you should go to these places and take advantage of it. And B, you should help to invest in something that you have a passion for. If it's a visual artist or if it's someone who's in the music business, you can provide some of that money as well through Arts Fest, a program like that. So it's an area that we continue to, I had a hell of a time getting artwork displayed in the legislature. I went over to the Arts Board. Shelley took me over there when she was still at the Arts Board and looked through their permanent collection. I said, this stuff ought to go out. People in Saskatchewan should see this because it's artwork done by artists in Saskatchewan. They're all Saskatchewan-based artists. And they do take an exhibit out once a year and travel around. But I said, when I was in high school, I was a bit of a jock, and I had all the benefits of a high school back in my day, 33 years ago, as I've said, where I had lots of sporting opportunities. But if I was a visual artist, or an aspiring actor, or somebody who wanted to play the harp, I didn't have a lot of support in West Valley, Saskatchewan 33 years ago. So if there's an aspiring visual artist out there sitting in Meadow Lake, and they see the fact that they can create these wonderful works of art, and the province will support them, they may end up doing it right here in Saskatchewan, staying here. And I said, and the Premier agreed with me, we ought to take these works of art and display them around the People's House, the legislative building, which we've done. If you've not been over there, take a walk around the different floors of the legislature. It's all works of art from Saskatchewan artists. We've got to celebrate that. That's what I've been trying to do.